Hello everybody, welcome back. We're finally going to start and work on our JavaScript. We're going to go and dive in head first in JavaScript. So the first thing we're going to learn about in this lesson are strings and variables. Some of the most important things we're going to have to learn about JavaScript are strings and variables. So let's go over here into these lecture slides. Now I created these lecture slides so it's easier for us to follow since JavaScript is particularly challenging for some people, and since it's a full-fledged programming language, I thought I'd help you guys out and help you visualize some of the things we're going to be doing rather than me speaking about it. So we're going to start off with strings. Now strings are a sequence of characters or symbols. Now basically strings can be anything you want. For example, they can be they can be words, and they can be numbers. Now the way we identify strings are through the use of quotes. Now we can either use a double quote or a single quote to mark off a string. For example, this over here would be a string, and this one would also be a string. So I'm going to go over there into Komodo and work on some strings. So I'm going to go and put a script tag in order to start with our JavaScript. Now let's try to make a string. So there's two ways we can make a string. We can do the double quotes or the single quotes. So I'm going to make a double quote one. Now as you can see, Komodo thankfully puts two quotes in for us, an opening quote and a closing quote. Now in between here we can create our string. For example, hey, I'm a string. So this would be a string, and we can also go down and make another string with a single quote, which would look like this, and we can also write, hey, I'm also a string. So these are both fully working strings. They do the same thing. All it is just a basic set of characters that we want to assign this string. So a string of characters is a string. So let's keep moving on. We can also join two strings. For example, let's say we had these two strings over here. Hey, I'm a string, and hey, I'm also a string. Now we can also join these two strings together so that they're all one sentence of a string by using a adding sign. So as you can see, we can take this string, which is this, plus another string, which is, plus this string, which says a string, and we can combine this all into one string that's going to say this is a string. So we can go over here and do the same thing. So let's go ahead and write, hey, this is a string. And we're going to concatenate that, which means joining two strings, by adding a plus symbol. So we'll go ahead and give ourselves some space, because we can do spaces in JavaScript, and I highly recommend putting a space between everything you do, because JavaScript will just ignore that extra space. So we're going to do plus, and we're going to add another string. Let's do this a single quote string. So let's do single quote, and let's do, and I'm also a string. And let's do a comma before this and. So as you can see, what we have so far, and we have concatenated two strings, and all this string will output is a string that says, hey, this is a string, comma, and I'm also a string. So that's how easy strings are, and it's really simple. Now the problem comes in when you have two strings inside of each other. For example, let's say, hey, I'm a string, but we also inside here we have another string called I'm a. Now let's say we had this and this. We have a problem, because in some situations we're going to have a string inside of a string. Now if we have two double quotes and another double quote inside of here, it's not going to work out, because this quote right here will think that it's going to end over here, and it's going to start another quote over here, and it's going to end this quote over here, leaving I'm a to be nothing. IA is not going to be outputted. So what we need to do is we need to nest strings. The way we can do this is by having double quotes on the outside of the string, and we can use single quotes on the inside. So for example, let's go ahead and change this one to a single quote, and let's change this one also to a single quote. And as you can see, this whole entire thing was converted into a string, and now there's nothing left out. All of these are strings that are in together. So in some situations we're going to have to nest strings, and the only way we can do this is to vary our quotes, either through using a double quote in the outside and using a single quote on the inside, or vice versa. So just keep that in mind when we're making strings, and let's go and move on to arithmetic operators. Now in JavaScript we're going to be using arithmetic operators. Now the great thing about JavaScript is that we can perform calculations, and not only calculations, but we can use the plus sign for concatenating and adding two strings together. So arithmetic operators act basically the same way you learned in math class. So we have the plus symbol that will add, we have the minus symbol that will subtract, we have an asterisk which will do multiplication, and we have a slash that will do division. So for example, let's say we wanted to do 5 divided by 7. It would be as easy as 5 space divided by and then 7. Now this isn't proper form of when we're doing arithmetic. I'm going to show you how to do that through variables, and it's going to become easier to use arithmetic operators once we learn variables and prompts and alerts. So that's all you really need to know. Here are all the arithmetic operators we're going to be using throughout this course: plus, minus, asterisk, and slash, which are multiplication and division. So let's keep on going. Now we're going to learn about variables. Now variables are basically a memory location with a name. Now variables are going to be used to store a value, and these values can be either numbers, strings, or objects. Now in terms of variables, we're going to be using the word var to signify that we're going to create a local variable. Now there's going to be two types of variables we're going to be using. One's going to be called a local variable, and one's going to be called a global variable. Now a local variable will have information that is only going to be accessible within inside that same program or that same function. For example, let's say we had two functions, one that was called function high and one that was function called hey. Now inside function high we had a value called x equals 5. Now if that was var x equals 5, we could only access var x equals 5 inside that same high function. We can't take that variable x equals 5 and use it in our hey function. But if we create a global variable will be accessible throughout the entire JavaScript program. So in between both our functions, we can use x equals 5. So if we create something like x equals 77, we can use that value in both function high and function hey. So hopefully that was easy to understand between local and global variables. Local, you can only use it inside that certain function, and global, you can use it outside and use it in multiple functions. So we're going to use an assignment operator, which is basically the equal sign. Now don't think of this in math as equal sign. We're going to call it the assignment operator. Basically, we're going to assign a value to a variable rather than it being a numerical equality sign. So this is an example of a variable. We have a local variable x. We can call a variable such as this, var x, and this basically doesn't assign anything. We're basically creating a variable inside our program. Now we can assign x a value. We can do this through x equals 77, and we can always add that semicolon, which we should do on all of our line of code for JavaScript just to keep it clean looking. As you can see, we have a sample lines of code over here. So we have var y equals 22. As you can see, we can create a number. We also have var z equals 18.95. So you can see we don't always have to use whole numbers. We can also use decimal points. Now we also have var s equals hello there. As you can see, var s was given the value of a string that says hello there. So those were variables. That's all we're going to be using throughout JavaScript. We're going to rely a lot on variables because they're going to help us store our data, and tons of data that we're going to be using throughout our entire programs. So moving on, we're going to learn about how to name variables. Now there's going to be certain rules we're going to have to know in order to name variables. So we're only limited to letters, digits, and underscore. Anything other than these will not be created a variable, and they will not run properly in JavaScript. So we're limited to letters, digits, which are numbers from 0 to 9, and underscore. And the first character cannot be a digit. For example, let's say we had a variable called 1hey. So let's say we had var 1hey. That doesn't work because the number cannot be the first letter or first character of the variable. But we can have hey1 as a variable. So that's the only exception. And also we want to avoid reserved words. For example, in JavaScript, there's going to be a lot of things or a lot of programs that are already built into the JavaScript that are going to resemble some variables that we want to make. For example, let's say we wanted to make a variable alert. We want to stay away from that just so that JavaScript doesn't get confused and think that, hey, I need to do this certain thing that I already am built to do. So we want to stay away from particular words like alert and prompt and some other ones we're going to learn throughout this course. There's going to be a particular way we name variables, and we're going to do that through camel case. Now, I'm going to show you an example of how to write camel case. So we're going to have a variable called, let's call this time of day. So we want a variable called time, and remember there's no spaces in between variables. So let's call this time of day. Now, we want this variable to be in good proper format. Even if we create it like this, JavaScript will still read it properly, but we want our code to be nice and clean looking and professional, so we're going to use camel case. So what that means is that the first word that you want is going to be lowercase all of it. But then every other word that's inside of your variable, we're going to uppercase and we're going to capitalize that first letter. So we have the word time, and all of that is going to be lowercase. But then we have the word of, so let's go ahead and uppercase the first letter of that, which would be the O, and we're going to keep the F in of lowercase. And then the next word we have is day. Now all we're going to do is going to uppercase day, the first letter of it, and we're going to keep everything else past that lowercase. Now this is good proper notation of a variable using camel case. We're going to keep wanting to do this as it makes our variables look different and allows us to distinguish variables. For example, if we had time of day, as you can see, the of and the day stand out, rather than if we had time of day, where all of this looks like a piece of text and we're not sure exactly what this variable does. So that's proper style for creating variables. So let's go on to different names of variables. Now when we're creating names of variables, we want to choose meaningful names. We want our variables to be very specific so that we can go back and we can understand what those variables contain and what type of data that those variables contain. For example, let's say we wanted to have a variable that represented temperatures. A good name for that variable would be temperature. Now a bad name for that would be temp, because temp is very vague. You want to know immediately what that variable contains. And if we create the variable named temperature, we're going to know exactly what that variable has inside of it. Now let's go on to the next one. The next one would be shoe size. As you can see, this clearly tells us, and it's in camel case, that hey, this variable is going to have values of shoe size. Some bad names would be lowercase s size. So you're left wondering, what the heck does s size mean? Because there's no specific meaning to it, right? But shoe size, you'll automatically know what that variable is going to contain. The same goes with these rest of the variables, row, maximum width, max width. As you can see, these are really vague and you're not going to understand what these variables contain in them. And so that was how to choose meaningful names. Now there's going to be another thing I need to teach you about strings and variables, and that's going to be numbers. So for example, let's create a var. Let's call this var x equals, and let's call this number 5. Right? We have a var x equals the string 5. Now remember that we put this in quotation marks, and that means that we're representing a string. Now let's also have another variable. Let's do var y equals, and let's call this 6. Now since we have 5 and 6, we can create var z equals x times y. Now if we were to think about that, this would mean that we're going to take 5 times 6 and var z should give us 30. But that's not how it works. See, a string is a set of characters. It's basically drawing symbols. So this var x basically has a symbol that looks like a 5, but it doesn't have that mathematical representation of the number 5. So if we have numbers inside of strings, we need to convert the string to a number. And the way we do that is by wrapping a number around it. So we're going to do var z. And this is the proper way to do the multiplication between x and y. So we're going to do var z equals, now we're going to put a number, we're going to wrap a number around this so that we can convert the string into a number. So we're going to write number, and in parentheses we're going to write what the variable is that we want to convert into a number. So we're going to put x, which represents the string of 5, and then now we can do the multiplication, and now we can multiply this by the number. So we're going to wrap a number around variable y, which is the string that contains 6. Now we're going to be converting the string of 5 and the string of 6 to the actual mathematical number of 5 and 6. Now this var z will give us the output of 30, because now it's converting this number 5 to an actual mathematical number of 5 times number 6, which is 6, which will give us 30. So just make sure that you understand that whenever we have a string, it's always going to be a set of characters, and it's going to draw a symbol that matches or looks like what we have inside here. It's not going to be the actual mathematical representation of what's inside of here. So we always want to make sure we wrap a number around here. That way we are able to convert this and be able to use this in mathematical calculations. Now if we didn't have this in quotation marks and we didn't have this as a string, this would easily work like this. So let's say we had var x equals 5 with nothing around it and var y equals 6. Then this over here, as highlighted, this one would work perfectly. This would still give us 30 because this is going to represent it as a number. So 5 times 6 would come out 30. So this would work. but whenever you have a string inside of here, you want to make sure you convert it into a number. So that's all you needed to know for strings and variables. We're going to keep working on and learning a little bit more advanced things about JavaScript. So until then, see you in the next lesson.